All right, let's get to the phone line and let's go to Cairo, Egypt, where on the line is our man from the Middle East, Eddie Yeranian, longtime 9-year contributor to the John Fredericks Radio Network. 9 years, Ed. Man, does that make both of us just that much older? I mean, it's even hard to say. Ed's been with me for 9 years. And he's in Cairo, and he's also part of the Voice of America machine, as well as a radio veteran. I love saying that word, Ed, a radio veteran of CBS Radio News. Eddie, great to have you, man.
Thank you, John. That's a very nice compliment you just gave me.
Well, Eddie, you're the man. So, okay, let's get to the United Arab Emirates. Now, here's the thing. I don't really believe anything that comes out of the UAE news portals because they have proven to give out misinformation constantly. I mean, if you ever travel there and you get the newspapers, I mean, it's kind of like the Onion. They just make up stuff. So what is going on with these ships that they say have been raided or attacked? Do you have the details on them?
Well, John, I can only go with the information that I'm seeing. And, of course, we all got burned during the lead up to the Iraq war in 2003. And that was deliberate misinformation, and it wasn't coming out of the Gulf. It was coming out of the U.S. government. I can give you 4 specific lies that were put out by the U.S. government and that were put out by the New York Times and the Washington Post. So also, if you watched WikiLeaks during this last electoral cycle in 2016, you will know that the government lies about everything. And I don't want to say that it's lying this time. I don't think Mr. Trump lies like the previous administration did. But at the same time, you've got to be wary of anything you see out there. So let's just start with what we've seen.
Okay.
There was a video that was broadcast on some Arab news channels. It's actually on YouTube, if you want to look for it, of a ship off of Fujairah Harbor that was burning. And this was alleged to be part of that attack on Sunday. And the media of various Arab countries has pointed out, claimed that 4 ships were hit, 2 of them Saudi, 1 Norwegian, and the third one, I believe, was an Emirati flag vessel.
Right.
The Saudis, the oil minister, Khalid al-Faleh, indicated that 2 of his ships were hit. One of them was called the Marzuka, at least from what they're claiming, and Sky News Arabia went out with their correspondent on another boat and went up to that ship. It was impossible to tell from sea level what the damage was to the ship, but it was still floating and didn't look to be in any serious condition from sea level. Now, it's possible the top was very seriously damaged. We can't say. The Saudis claim that both of their ships, oil ships, suffered serious structural damage. That's what they're saying. Now, there's another story that's going out this morning which is even more ominous. Well, about the same level of ominousness, but it hasn't even been picked up by anyone in the American media. So that just tells you how interested they are in actually hearing facts and information. But let me just tell you what the Arab media is reporting. Apparently, 2 pumping stations about 300 kilometers outside of Riyadh, according to Saudi-owned media, and their oil minister, who's covering all this, were hit by 2 drones, apparently. That's the story they're going with, armed drones, pilotless armed drones, on the pumping station that goes from the eastern province to Yanbo. Now, I forgive you if you don't know the geography of Saudi Arabia, but the eastern province is where all the oil is located. It's not that far from the Gulf. And Yanbo is on the Red Sea. Now, if you watch Lawrence of Arabia, it's the port where they were trying to go with their camels in the film. It's on the Red Sea. It's not far from Aqaba, and it's where they pump a lot of oil because it doesn't have to go through any turbulent zones in the Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz or around Yemen, which is currently unstable. So that's disquieting because that's attacking very directly the source of oil to the world, one of the major sources of oil to the world that's coming out of Saudi Arabia and going to the Red Sea for delivery to Europe, America, Canada, wherever. So that's very worrisome. Now, did Iran do this? We can't prove it, but their top naval commander, and I put this in my Voice of America story yesterday. It looks like they cut it out. Admiral Khanzadi said that the U.S. Should not be in the Gulf, and that their presence is outdated, and basically was making threatening noises at the same time that these attacks were in the headlines. So he was obviously not trying to downplay those attacks. So if you were going to be suspicious of who did this, it would naturally go to Iran. But that is, to be perfectly frank, we cannot prove at this point that Iran did it. And we're hearing in the Arab media that the FBI is now out there investigating. Now, will I believe what the FBI comes up with after the Russia hoax investigation? Maybe not.
Mm-hmm. You know, I guess the question here is, Edward, we're with Edward Yeranian. He's our man in the Middle East. He's live in Cairo, longtime veteran with CBS News and the Voice of America, and he's been with us here on the John Fredericks Show for 9 years. Eddie, I guess the question becomes, if not Iran, who?
Well, there are several possibilities. I mean, I've seen a lot of fishy things that have gone on over the years. I mean, you know, who might you suspect? Out here in the Middle East, they would say, well, maybe the CIA did it. I personally don't suspect that's what happened. I don't think the Trump administration is trying to get into a frontal conflict with Iran, at least not right now. And the Israelis, they have been known to have agents and do things in the Emirates and elsewhere in the Gulf, and it would be possibly in their interest to do it. But once again, I don't think that's what happened. And, of course, at this point, we still don't know what happened.
Well, what we do know is that tankers are on fire, right? So that we do know. We don't know exactly how this happened. Here's what the president said yesterday when he was in the Oval Office with the White House spray, when he was meeting with the president of Hungary and asked about this. He said, we'll see what happens with Iran. If they do anything, it would be a very bad mistake if they do anything. I'm hearing little stories about Iran. If they do anything, they will suffer greatly. We'll see what happens with Iran. And then the question to him was, Mr. President, are you concerned about attacks on oil tankers in the Middle East, which is what we're talking about today, Edward? And President Trump said, we'll see what happens. It's going to be a bad problem, I can tell you that. So obviously the Trump administration, like you said, all over this, and the president not happy with it. And that's why I guess we're sending investigators out to see if indeed Iran was the assailant here. Let me ask you something, Edward, if you don't mind. I have to beg this question. You said at the beginning of our segment, you said there were 4 lies that the U.S. government told about Iraq. That's a pretty bold statement you made. I happen to agree with it. But I was wondering if you could share with our audience, I don't want to let that go. Obviously, it's off the tip of your tongue. What do you believe were the 4 lies that were told to the American people by the U.S. government in the second Iraq War?
Yes. Well, the first lie they came up with was that Saddam Hussein was buying yellowcake uranium from Niger, and that was fairly quickly disproven by American diplomatic people. I believe a woman and a man who were both former diplomats. I can't remember the name off the top of my head.
Valerie Plame.
Another lie was that Saddam Hussein's intelligence agency had met with al-Qaeda in Prague, and that was fairly quickly disproven. Another lie was that Saddam Hussein had some kind of wacky gun, some kind of cannon. It didn't get as much play as some of the other 3 big lies, but it still did get some play. The fourth lie was, of course, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And as many people, Arab media people, pointed out, Western countries were involved in selling some of those weapons of mass destruction to Saddam Hussein. So they knew he had them, but he had apparently destroyed them from everything that ultimately turned out to be that once the investigations were taking place. And, of course, the UN Chief Weapons Inspector, Hans Blix, who's a former Norwegian foreign minister, very respected man, was all over the media trying to say, wait, we don't know this for a fact that he has weapons of mass destruction. The U.S. weapons inspector, I think his name was Scott Ritter, I believe.
Scott Ritter, yes.
They hit him with some sort of internet that he was talking to young underage girls on the internet. So that was obviously, I can't prove it, but somebody was trying to discredit him while he was trying to point out that these charges against Saddam Hussein were false.
So basically, these were the four lies that you say were advanced to the American people in the lead up to the Iraq invasion to convince people that it was the right and worthy thing to do, when in fact there was no cannon, there was no Iranian buy of yellow whatever it was in Africa. That was disproven by Valerie Plam's husband. They actually made a movie on that starring Sean Penn. Can't remember the name of it, but I remember watching it. That was disproven. And, of course, there was never any meeting in Prague with al-Qaeda. That was completely made up. And then there were never any WMDs. So, these were four lies put out by the U.S. government, picked up by legacy media, Washington Times, Post, L.A. Times, in advancing this, purposeful justification for invading Iraq, which made absolutely no sense to anybody that really followed this stuff. Let me just ask you something domestically. Those of us that were against the war, like me, it's easy to look back and say, well, we never believed it, and we were right. But then you look at Edward Yeranian, then you look at Joe Biden, who's running for president, who's surging in the polls on the Democratic side, and he voted in favor of the war. And, of course, he's running in a Democratic primary with a number of progressives that were opposed to it. How does he reconcile that? Like, how does anybody go back now and reconcile that vote? What do you think?
I question a lot of the morals of some of the people that are running our government or participating in our government in the Congress and whatnot. Someone was pointing out on Twitter that Senator Blumenthal was criticizing President Trump and that he had lied about being a combat veteran. And, of course, Senator Biden, whom I've always liked, I must confess, even though I wouldn't vote for him, I've always liked him. He lied about going to Princeton. I did go to Princeton, so that that irked me a little bit, that he would claim that he went to Princeton when he didn't. That is a lie. I mean, if I told you I went to Yale and I didn't, that would be a lie. Why would I be saying that on the air if it's not true? So you have to question the scruples of some of the people who are in the government, and I guess that's just part of the entire equation that we're trying to grapple with just on a daily basis with the Trump administration, with the lies coming out of Congress, coming out of Senator Mr. Mueller's investigation. I don't know that he specifically lied, but he certainly carried out what seems to be a bit of a fraudulent investigation. Anyway, so the truth is difficult to fathom, and sometimes you have to just keep digging and digging and digging until you approximate it.
Let's get to the one more issue. We're almost out of time, but I want to get to the the Trump administration, I should say, putting further screws on the Iranians in their ability to sell oil to Europe. The president putting further deeper sanctions, saying anybody that buys their oil or does business with them can't do business in the U.S. So you've got a lot of European companies now and governments shying away. They don't want to touch it, further ailing the Iranian economy. But now, of course, in the U.S., that could result in higher gas prices, as some people are saying. Is that strategy from the Arab media that you're involved with there in the Middle East, is that strategy seen as being effective for those that are suspicious of Iran, or is it just seem like over the top?
Most of the Sunni Arab countries, the major Sunni Arab countries, including Egypt, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Emiratis, not the Qataris, not the Omanis, who have close ties to Iran, are backing President Trump because they're worried about Iran. They're worried about Iran advancing its peons in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, involved in Palestine and Gaza. So there's a great deal of disquiet from the mainstream Arab Sunni countries about Iran. And while I don't think they want an overt war with Iran, I think they want President Trump to play tough with Tehran.
So the UAE does $200 billion in annual trade with Tehran. So how do they reconcile the fact that they're doing more trade with Iran than anybody in the Gulf and half the states in Europe? It's over $200 billion of annual trade. So how do they justify this?
Well, I think Iraq does a lot of trade with Iran as well, but many of the Iraqi politicians are worried that Iran is trying to swallow them up. So while at the same time it's in their interest to trade with Iran, they don't want to be subsumed by it. And I think that's the case with countries like the Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is worried that Iran is trying to advance its peons into the eastern province, which is a large Shiite majority. They're worried about the Iranians and Hezbollah being involved in Yemen. They're worried about the Houthis taking control of Yemen, which is not really not Houthi territory. Their stronghold is in the north of the country. So a lot of worries. Beirut, they're worried that Iran has gained control of Lebanon, whereas Lebanon is not very favorable to Hezbollah. It's only there because Iran supported it and gave it a lot of money. Hezbollah has supported President Assad in Syria, even though it's not very popular in Syria. So a lot of things Iran does that worries the mainstream Sunni Arab countries and the mainstream Sunni majority in many of these places.
All right, Edward Yeranian, we're out of time for this segment. I always want to thank you for your keen insight. Eddie Yeranian live in Cairo, Egypt. Ed, thanks for being with us. I really appreciate that. We'll see what happens, and we'll maybe get to the bottom of whether the Iranian Navy or not shot at these oil tankers. And if they did, you got to really ask the question, why are you going to poke this bear? Why not just leave it go? I don't know what upside they could possibly find here, because I think what the president just proved with China is he's going to act. And this is a very different administration than some of the others. So I just don't know what the thinking would be. But, Eddie, we're going to find out. And thank you for shedding light on a very dark topic, Ed. Thank you.
My pleasure, John.